Hi, I'm Amy Wilkins, leadership coach, former media exec, and your host of Thriving in the Messy Middle. This is a space for women leaders navigating those in between seasons, the moments when things feel uncertain, stretched, or messy, and you're trying to find your footing without losing yourself. Some episodes are conversations with remarkable women leaders sharing the lessons they've learned along the way. And other times, it's just you and me, slowing things down and naming what's really going on. Think of this as a place to reset, reflect, and reconnect with what matters most. Because thriving isn't about having it all figured out. It's about learning how to grow, lead, and move forward, even when things feel messy. I am so thrilled to welcome Jeanne Meyer to Thriving in the Messy Middle. Jeanne and I go way back to our Martha Stewart days, and I've admired her ever since as a true communications powerhouse. She's the founder of Authentic Intelligence, where she advises C-suite executives on communication strategy, crisis management, thought leadership, and visibility. Over the years, she's led communications and marketing for global brands including Martha Stewart, Al Gore's Current TV, EMI Music, and ToysRUs.com. Jeanne is the person organizations call when the stakes are high, when a CEO needs to nail a national media appearance, or when a startup is scaling fast and the story needs clarity, or when a reputation is on the line and steady leadership matters most. With decades of experience across media, entertainment, and emerging tech, Jeanne has a gift for turning chaos into clarity. And today, we're going to explore what that looks like in the messy middle moments that shape us. Jeanne, it's so good to see you.
And you.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. I am really excited to have people hear from you for so many reasons. But before we get into that, I would love for you to just say a few words about yourself.
Sure. They might be different words than I would have used when we worked together back in the Martha Stewart days. I am Jeanne Meyer. I am a communications coach, and I help people and companies increase their value through better communication. And
Mm.
I do that in two ways. I work with C suite level executives, founders of upstart scale ups, as well as big Fortune 50 companies. And I also work with heads of communications at these companies to help them along the way. A lot of folks who take these roles have never been through it. And I have probably more scar tissue and seasoning leading communications at some big public companies than most people. So I'm there to mentor and help along the way.
Yeah, and I'm sure that some of that time at Martha Stewart was valuable in working with people
Indeed.
who are those high level. I would just be curious, like, what's your favorite part about what you do?
I th what I the favorite part of what I do is the immediate impact that work that I do has. Literally a tiny piece of advice, a tweak in how you show up, a suggestion on how to deliver a message with more impact, or a strong recommendation to not do something can
Mhm.
really have a pivotal impact on a business, on a person, and how they can connect with an audience or the value that they're throwing out into the marketplace. It's pretty quick and swift. Some of it, though, has to be built up over time. But as an adrenaline junkie, I love to see the impact of what I'm doing in real time.
Yeah, I really get that. Actually, I remember going through training years ago when I was first starting to speak in front of larger groups, and it was eye-opening to have somebody show you what you're doing and things that unless they say it, you really don't even know it's happening. So, I love that. So, what does all of this teach us or help us as it relates to these messy middle times that we might be going through, right? So I'm talking about women leaders who are in rising leadership roles in industries that are there's a lot of upheaval in a lot of places right now. And, what can people do when they are in those spaces to even prepare themselves for a mess?
Yeah. It's a good way to put it. You describe a lot of different kinds of people in a lot of different
Yeah.
types of circumstances. But let's
Yeah.
start with someone whose career is on the rise. They're so good at what they do. They sell better. They make products better. They're smart. They're the smartest engineers in the room. And suddenly they're put in a position where they have to oversee a team. And probably they haven't really received a lot of training in how to do that. And in particular, over the last 5 years, it's been difficult as more and more people work remotely or in a hybrid role. It's really difficult to learn by osmosis or by really seeing people that emulating other leaders. So I think one of the things to expect in those circumstances is the need to develop soft skills on your own. Don't assume that your company or entity is going to set you up for success. And that's true if you're an entrepreneur as well. You're going to reach a point where it'll be really important for you to have world class soft skills, a high EQ. And that's stuff that really you don't learn in college. You don't learn it even in a lot of management training. Seek those things out. A lot of that stuff is available for free. Caveat emptor, though, you want to make sure you're looking and you're talking to a reputable source. And you can also do that by asking for mentors or sponsors, meaning you can do this with allies, with folks at your same level. You're mentoring each other, you're sponsoring each other. Women who maybe are in a different set of circumstances, maybe they've made it to the top and it's really one of those situations where they really don't know what they want to do when they grow up, even though they've made it to the highest mountaintop they ever thought they could reach. A lot of women in that situation, that really messy middle, will stop and consider, where do I go from here? And I find a lot of women in these circumstances, myself included, find an opportunity to rethink everything and to really consider what's important and to make sure that next first step is going to address things that are truly important. They're not always monetary, sometimes they are. They're sometimes more spiritual or purpose driven. And the things you do have the opportunity to take that next first step in a direction that will serve you in ways other than the classic career ladder.
Yeah. I That's one of the a trickier time, right? When people leave something, whether by choice or not, and they get stuck. And in terms of what is that first step? And I see it all the time with people that I coach that they don't even know where to start thinking about that future. Or they have people say, just get right back out there. And the challenge with that is when people do that, just get back out there thing, they go to the same environment they just came from, which in some cases didn't serve them to begin with. Yeah, I noticed that happening all the time. Can you share a messy moment with our listeners for yourself? Yeah.
I have so many. I
Okay,
start,
and before you go there,
yeah.
I want that people to get that's true, right? We don't just have one,
All right.
that we have more than one, but
How much time do we have? Let me start with a whopper, right? This is
okay.
one that I would consider to be a real eye opener. I think I climbed the career ladder pretty quickly and I was put into leadership positions at a pretty young age, thrown into the deep end. But I had a senior in my title or a general manager in my title when I was in my late 20s. And again, I was learning as I was growing into that role. And it's the kind of profession that I was in, corporate communications can be a high burnout role. You're doing a lot of crisis management, you're juggling a lot of responsibilities. And I did this, boy, for 20 years straight until I left Martha Stewart and I decided I wanted out. I did not want to pursue corporate communications anymore. I wanted to open up something very tactile, a mom and pop, like a coffee shop or something. But got drawn into consulting and I realized that I liked it a lot. But along the way, I was never sure whether I wanted to go back and look for that full-time corporate gig again with the benefits and the big salary. And I decided during that period to have a child. And that probably hastened my decision to become a consultant. And I recognized that I really loved being on the consulting side, not someone who was going to found a company with a product, et cetera. But I heard the siren call of a very big, sexy job that I thought would also be family friendly. And it was with a very big company, an agency. And I was to be their head of marketing. I had developed over the years a bias against working with these very kinds of organizations. I tended to favor working with PR agencies, ad agencies, consultancies that were a little more indie, smaller, because I liked getting personal attention from very senior people. Whereas with big agencies, you would sometimes just get stuck with a kid and you were teaching them how to do their job. But yet I was offered a lot of money and all the boxes seemed to be checked to go work for this mega agency. And I had this like nagging spidey sense that I totally ignored, which was this is not a fit for you. This you're going to take this job for all the wrong reasons. And sure enough, uh, we both discovered that it wasn't a fit. And before I even officially announced myself, 5 weeks later, we agreed to disagree and parted ways. And I learned so much from that lesson, which was just go for the money. Make sure that you write down everything you want, three or four things. Somebody told me this once. I still apply it. Write it on a piece of paper, put it in your wallet, refer to it all the time. And in this particular instance, I ignored m 3 out of 4. And it was humbling, yet it was liberating because what it told me was that I succeed as a consultant and as an advisor to other senior level people. I maybe am not someone who's gonna thrive in, like, a really big global machine.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
just one of many, and I have volumes, but that was certainly one of the more recent ones and one that I refer back to often.
Yeah. I love what you just said about having those 3 or 4. I usually say you can have 5. And when you create them, you start taking them out on a test drive when you have a new role or even when you speak to somebody else about a potential new role, because you can find out in those moments, wow, what was really important to me to have on this list is I don't want to work at a big company, a mega. I want to be in a more entrepreneurial environment. So it gives you an opportunity to tweak it too. It's like you don't have to, it doesn't have to be carved in stone. We can evolve that list. What would you suggest to rising leaders as it relates to them developing their personal brand?
Wow. Again, something we could talk for hours about. And certainly you and I learned from the OG of the personal brand, Martha Stewart. And I think really you'd have to point to her as truly the first personal lifestyle business brand textbook. What I would say is to women is I think it's important that communication is very important. I have a tiny suggestion. It's one of those things that can have an immediate impact that we just talked about. And it's not a big macro thing, it's a micro thing, but it's a trait I notice so much in women, not just women, but especially women. And it is something called uptalk. Uptalk is when women fall into this cadence where they end every question, every sentence with a question, and it undermines their credibility. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
If we eliminate uptalk, if you can learn to modulate your voice, to sometimes end what you're saying in a more declarative way, it will make you come across as the strong, smart individual that you are. There are other verbal tics to do away with. If I may make a suggestion, or this may sound stupid, but, or I'm really sorry to interrupt here, but um, those are some things that are also great to just take them off a bad piece of costume jewelry and never look at them again. So there are some ways to show up as a leader that are very more in the optical or kind of audio. It's pure optics, but it really is important. So the sooner you can seek those kinds of things out and learn from the best, do that. So uptalk, no more, please.
What would you say is the best way to even discover that you're doing it?
Good question. Practice, record yourself. I media train, I give presentation training. I have done it for decades. And yet I sometimes fall. I notice I have ticks that I fall back on that I always need to correct. I say actually way too much. It's just a filler word. I always tell people that it's really important when you're on camera, try not to look sideways when you're trying to think of something that might make you look shifty. Try not to look up when you're trying to come up with an answer, but look down, pause briefly. So, very easy to train people to do that. But I personally, my eyes are always up. So, record yourself, look at yourself. It doesn't have to be a video that you don't have to do a TikTok and or a LinkedIn and cringe and get it out there, but do your own videos, practice your speeches, a presentation, maybe you have a pitch, record yourself and you will notice some things that you can work on. The other thing that I think is really important for any communicator to know is that when you have the stage, when you've been given the mic, or when you have an opportunity to seek it out, take that chance because communication is a very powerful way for you to drive an agenda. Whether you're selling a product or you're really hoping to get noticed and get that promotion, or you are really trying to make a big presentation that will fund a big project that you want to pursue. It's really important to think about what are the big three things that I want to accomplish here. Maybe it's just a message I want to leave them with, or a compelling argument, or a data point, but you're really not going to have any chance to do more than three. And if you get one, you're cooking. But go into these things knowing that you have an agenda to set. I like to say, you virtually think about yourself climbing into a F1 vehicle, take a helmet, like an imaginary helmet, put it on your head, and that is your agenda mindset. You're going to go into these situations wearing an agenda mindset, knowing that you've got three things to push forward in advance. You can gamify it because if you're asked questions, you can feel the question, but can turn that back into an opportunity to deliver that one of those messages. So I love that kind of opportunity as well. When you're given the mic, take it. And if you're a woman who's on the way up or looking for an opportunity to pivot, don't shirk from taking the mic and seeking out those opportunities unapologetically. It can be cringy, but do it because it can really have an immediate payoff.
Yeah, and I will offer that the first time I ever spoke publicly was an epic fail. And you know what? It's okay. Jump back in. You're learning, right? And I think that one of the things I want to make sure we're imparting is that it's all a learning opportunity. And anytime it feels messy like that, so what? You can just get back up and do it again.
And
So,
you've learned a lot of messages or a lot of lessons from that quote failure unquote.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it doesn't feel like a failure when I think of it that way as a reframing any kind of experience like that and say, oh, it taught me something and I'm moving forward. What would you offer to leaders who are not in that boardroom who make those decisions, but the leaders who are having to keep the troops moving?
Yeah.
Any advice you have for them?
My first piece of advice is I don't care what size of organization you are. If you haven't pondered a contingency plan, a crisis plan thought about playing devil's advocate and thought about things that could go wrong so that you have a way to deal with them, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. And nobody thinks they need crisis management until they're in the middle of a crisis. So just make it something that you get done this year. It will pay off in dividends. There was a recent survey. that of 500 CEOs, 89% of them said they had recently had to manage through a crisis. They might have been referring to COVID or the social justice movement or something that happened, but they all said it was there. And yet so many companies didn't have a plan. Those that did have a plan uh, rebounded 40% faster. They took a 30% less of a knock financially. It pays real dividends to be prepared like that. The other thing is just to make sure the very basic things you can do is to make sure you know how to reach your people and that you have a plan to at least send out what I call a put a pin in it message where you're just acknowledging that something happened and that you're on it. Do that expeditiously if you can. There will be tiny instances where maybe you can't because of legal reasons, but make sure you have an opportunity to put a pin in it. Do you have the mechanism to do that? If you're an employer where a lot of people aren't in front of a screen, do you know how to reach them at scale? That kind of. The other thing is really the second step is before you really develop a bona fide response, get the facts. Make sure you know everything that happened and ask more than one participant so that you get all the different perspectives. You will, when you go through that exploration, it can be very revealing. And sometimes that can take a while. And it is important then during those, as you're discovering what happened, just give people regular updates. Try and be as transparent as you can. Over communicate. That's absolutely critical. Repetition is fine. Be prepared with a plan. Be ready to know how to reach all your stakeholders, customers, board members, employees of all flavors, investors, if that's the case. If you're somehow involved with government, you need to know how to reach folks in local, state, and federal government. How are you going to do that? And also get to the bottom of it before you make a real plan and over communicate.
I'm wondering how what you just shared, also applies to individual preparedness. As someone who might be part of a reorg, there's a lot of reorgs happening right now. There's a lot of acquisitions and mergers that are changing whether or not someone has a spot. And not because they're not a superstar, just there isn't room for this. And I find that people get caught flat footed. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts.
I think the first thing, and I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard this today, is AI is changing everything. And it is imperative that any kind of function, if you're not already availing yourself to resources that will teach you about what AI can do for you, you're really on the back foot. You can get up to the front foot pretty quickly, though. And you think about it this way. I view the use of AI in the most basic way, whether you're just communicating with a Perplexity, a Claude, a ChatGPT, as simply a way of being an expert delegator. Because if you're doing great prompting, the kind of prompting that will result in really magical outcomes, you're essentially delegating. And good delegators don't just set it and forget it. They tweak. They say, "Are you sure? Will you go back and do that again or do it this way?" So it is really not something to be intimidated about because you don't need to write a line of code, but you do know how to delegate. There are so many free or very affordable courses out there on AI for every discipline. I know there's several for marketing, there's several for product managers, and they're fun, but sometimes you have to just do that on your own, time block it, get it done. If there's anything that I would advise anybody who's in the workforce to do is just figure out how to use AI, and not just with the large language models, but try and pick out a tool that, and play around with it. I use something called Beautiful AI, which is a deck builder, and it is incredible. You can literally give it a very long prompt and voila, it will create the first draft of a deck. And yeah, you might get rid of 50% of it, but it will really help you start that framework.
It's always easier to be the person who's editing something than it is to get to build it all from scratch.
Mhm. I also think, there are at a certain point, the writing is on the wall with many industries. And if you are in a senior role, it's important to advocate for yourself. If you see a pathway up, don't just wait to be noticed. Make sure that you're collecting ways that you can market yourself. And at the same time, this is your own crisis plan, right? Have contingencies. If you think this company in our industry just did a reorg and they were prepared to offer packages, maybe now is the time for me to take that package, put it in or start that business. That's something to really just do more than dream about. It might be a good time to make a plan, seek advice on that level, and or you look at something else. Make sure you're out there in the market. And in all of these situations, you have to be someone who is going to be ready to make your expertise known to the market. And in most situations, this is when it is important to not only advocate for yourself, but speak up and show up. And there's all different ways to do that in all different kinds of industries. But it is a moment when it can be very uncomfortable. It can be rough at the start. Amy, you just mentioned you had that same situation,
Yeah.
but is now there's no time like the present to do it.
Half of the people that I coach, that they wait until they're in a more difficult place to say, "Oops, I need to network," or "Oops, I need to make sure that my profile is stellar." And I haven't paid attention to any of that because I was happy, and I was one of the things I always felt this way myself on my way as I rose, like, always be interviewing.
Mm.
Always be networking. And those interviews could be informational, but they give you that opportunity to stay connected with people. And I think that's one of those things where people then suddenly feel very alone when they get in those situations because they were isolating, and that doesn't help.
True. Being a networker can, in and of itself, have a network effect on your career and your life. And I've always been a big believer in it. Took me a while to come around to it, believe it or not, but it can be learned. If you don't feel like you're an innate networker, if maybe you're an introvert, it doesn't matter. You can do it and you can be valuable to other people. Just remember, it shouldn't just always be transactional. I always like to end or start every conversation with a how can I help you? What do you need? And it could be personal as I need a new dog groomer or want to get a warm introduction to the person at XYZ company. It doesn't matter.
Right.
They'll remember that I offered. And sometimes I can come through and it's gratifying.
You've gotta have that network available. You've gotta be, like, really developing it along the way and not letting it get cold, right, where it's just a LinkedIn connection, but nothing more. That doesn't necessarily help you in those times.
That's so true.
Is there anything else, any other tips or tricks that you would wanna offer to any of our folks in the messy middle?
Sure, I have two, and they're both very different. So I'll give them, they're two favorite tricks. When you do start thinking about getting out in the world and sharing your expertise or being a thought leader on LinkedIn, that's always a good place to start. That's what comes to mind when we think of thought leadership. The most important thing that I advise people to do is be generous. LinkedIn isn't the place to post the selfie when you're speaking at a conference and it's like, hey, look at me. Unless you have an insight to go along with it. Like, while I was on this panel, this person said something mind blowing, and here it was. So you're sharing, you're bringing them into the room, you're being generous. Every now and then, yeah, you might have an ask. So I always like to say, stick to a 4-to-5 ratio of give, get. Four, ins- deliver four valuable, juicy insights that will make people stop in their scroll because it's going to help them do their job. And you want them to scribble it down or make a note of it. To every, look at me, or I want to make the bestseller list. Please buy my book. 4 to 5. Um, the other tip relates to, again, how you show up physically. I talked about uptalk, but I have another trick which I love, and I learned it from a radio DJ. And it's a kind of a modulation trick. It's a mental trick to make sure that you don't get, when you get nervous, some people get a little sing-songy or they're going fast. And it is a trick I call high, low, fast, slow. When you think about it and you're having a conversation like the one we're having, some of the most compelling speakers mix up talking really fast and then sometimes slowing down for impact. And sometimes they go up high and sometimes they go down low. But what it is, it's anything boring, and it's a way to keep your voice modulated in any kind of conversation that will help you connect with an audience and make sure they aren't falling asleep.
Yeah, I love that. That's really great. I never heard that before in that way, so I love that you shared that. Anything else you wanna share before we
No, I'm
wrap
just
up?
so glad that this brought us back together. And
Me
I
too.
love that you're doing this podcast and that you're out there helping other people, mentoring and coaching them along the way. So good for you. Very inspiring. And thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jean.
Yeah.
Great to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening today. I hope something you heard gave you a little clarity, or maybe just a sense that you're not alone in this season. The messy middle isn't something we pass through once. It shows up again and again, and each time we meet it with a bit more awareness, a bit more choice, and a lot more self-trust. If this episode resonated, follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if someone came to mind while listening, share it with them. That's how this community grows. You'll find links and resources in the show notes and more ways that we can work together at chooseaw.com. And I'll leave you with this reminder. You are the most worthwhile project you will ever work on. So until next time, keep thriving, even in the messy middle.